Finland has a border with Russia of over 1,300 kilometres, the largest in NATO territory. It's frequently targeted by Russia through cyber and hybrid war, including the sabotaging of undersea cables. In response, Finland is reconsidering its policy shift when it comes to EU defence spending and is even considering defence bonds. For the Europe conversation, I catch up with Heikki Otto, MP for Lapland and chair of the Grand Committee of the Finnish Parliament. So Heikki Otto, chair of the Grand Committee here in Helsinki, thanks very much for joining us on the Europe conversation. Well, I want to start off with Finland and the discussions that are happening in the EU at the moment and over the next few months around defence spending. We've heard, for example, Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, saying Europe needs to pay more. We know that Donald Trump's main message is Europe needs to pay more. And we hear that Finland might be open to the issue of defence bonds.
We will assist Ukraine and we will use all the necessary means. But of course, I would like to turn the discussion towards how we make Russia pay. We have hundreds of billions of frozen Russian assets in Europe. And of course, we have to find a legal framework to use those to support Ukraine now during the war, but also to rebuild the country. It cannot be the way that the Russians can come and kill and rape, destroy homes and schools and hospitals, and then they wouldn't have to pay for what they have done. Of course, the European Union and the West needs to find the legal framework to use the frozen Russian assets to pay. But otherwise, Finland has not closed any option to aid Ukraine because we have to give the message to the front lines that we do all the necessary means to support Ukraine.
Because so far defence bonds have been off the table because countries like Germany and others are not supporting it. So can I just ask you Finnish position on this?
As I mentioned, we don't close any option away at the moment because our message to the Ukrainians fighting for their lives and fighting for our freedom also is that we do everything in our powers to aid them to win their struggle against the evil that is threatening the peace and stability in Europe. What comes to this kind of bond question, that's more of a technical at the moment, I would say.
Because it does make a significant shift from Finnish policy when it comes to extra EU spending. I suppose that's because of the nature of the threat.
Everybody in Europe understands that this is really an existential issue for not only Finland and the countries neighboring Russia, but the whole of Europe and for the whole free world.
You've got a particularly large border with Russia, over 1,300 kilometres. We've heard that there is hybrid war taking place here from Russia. Also, there is the concerns around the Russian shadow fleet. There's GPS jamming. Can you talk us through some of what's been happening?
Well, Finland is very well prepared. We have been preparing for this kind of situations for decades. I can say for 80 years now. And my message to other Europeans is that this hybrid war that is ongoing and takes shapes like cyber attacks, but also different sabotage and using irregular migration to pressure governments, it's not aimed only towards Finland or the neighboring countries, but Russia is trying to destabilize the whole of Europe. So the whole Europe has to take this hybrid war seriously. And because Russia cannot pressure us by threatening in the way of conventional war, because we are all members of NATO, the hybrid war is the mean they use to threaten us.
What is the Finnish position on Ukraine joining NATO as part of a negotiation where NATO would give Article 5 protections for the unoccupied territories at least?
Well, of course, Ukraine must have, and the people of Ukraine must have the possibility to choose for their own future. And if they are willing to join NATO, I believe NATO has to live by its own standards and enable all the free European nations to join. So, of course, Ukraine needs to have this path. But first, NATO and us as NATO countries need to enable Ukraine to win this war, that they can have peace in their own country, and that they have this integrity of their internationally recognized border.
Donald Tusk and Emmanuel Macron are discussing potentially sending 40,000 troops, peacekeeping troops, into Ukraine, after the war. Is that something that Finland would support, given how, as you mentioned, well protected but also well trained people are, or troops and conscripts are here?
Well, Finland has a history of being almost a superpower in peacekeeping, and we have taken part in nearly all the major UN operations, and it's interesting to see if this kind of operation has UN backing, or would it be only EU operation, but first we need to have the deal. But what I say to all the Europeans is that we cannot close any option how to enable Ukraine to win the war, find peace in Ukrainian terms, and after that, of course, we have to support the peace in all the necessary ways.
And just moving on to Syria, what do you think the implications of the fall of Assad are for Russia in the region?
Well, of course, that was very humiliating for Putin. We know that some of the generals that have been doing poorly, and of course we are happy that Russian generals are generally doing very poorly, have been moved from Ukrainian front to Syria, and now they were totally humiliated by the rebels. So, of course, at the moment we are happy for the Syrian people that they at least have the possibility to start a democratic new era for their nation. But of course, at the same time, we have to be realistic that we've already heard some voices that are talking about the type of government they have in Afghanistan, and that's of course worrying.
Before Assad fell, some countries, Giorgia Meloni in Italy, Denmark, Hungary, were considering normalization with Assad in order to send Syrians back to Syria, even though we knew that there was an industrial scale of torture, of murder, of massacre by Assad and his regime for the last few decades. Is that, I suppose, a warning cry that European policy on asylum is getting too hardline and not empathetic enough?
Well, that's at the moment something we don't need to worry about, because the rebels were successful and Assad is now in Moscow. But of course, we as a West should help now Ukraine, I mean Ukraine foremost, but Syria also, to build up democratic society. And then of course Syrian people are free then to choose their own future.
But Finland has stopped anyway asylum processing for Syrians for the moment, but do you think there should be now a push or encouragement to send Syrians back? Or is it too early to say, given that you mentioned this talk about an Afghanistan-type rule in Syria?
Well, I would say it's too early to say what happens. We as a EU and West should help the interim government in Syria to be able to establish democratic and rules-based society, rule of law, and the basic human rights and freedoms for the people. And I believe after that there will be, of course, Syrians traveling back to their home country. But I hope that Syria will develop to be a society where Syrians are in the future free to move to Europe as well if they so choose. So I really hope that this could be a turning point for the Middle East to start to build up more democratic societies there.
What do you say to countries like Ireland and Austria and Malta, who are not members of NATO, call themselves neutral, and they don't give any support when it comes to the security of the European Union or the EU as a whole?
Well, the first priority is, of course, to take care of everybody's own defense. And after that, the second most important priority is to support Ukraine. And I believe all the countries you mentioned have been supporting Ukraine in the ways that have been possible for them. And if they only could somehow intensify the support, I believe the West together we will succeed to help Ukraine to win this horrible war.
And just on Hungary and Slovakia, countries that are actively hostile to supporting Ukraine, what do you say to them?
Well, it's a pity, and I believe countries that have had in their past issues with the Russian Soviet Union should all remember what the Russians and Soviets have been capable of doing, and understand that we don't want to see that to happen to anybody. We can see with our own eyes that it's happening at the Ukraine this very moment.
Just final question, because you're an MP for Lapland, which is so it's the busiest time of year for you. Santa is leaving from Lapland to travel around the world, but it's also a place which held NATO's largest ever artillery exercise, and that's within the year of Finland joining NATO, a sign of the times.
Well, that's how it is, and as already mentioned, if we wish for peace, we have to prepare for war. So this is the situation we have at the moment in my hometown in Rovaniemi at the Arctic Circle, that there are thousands and thousands of people around the world coming to meet Santa Claus, and I can see the bright eyes of the children, how happy they are when they meet Santa, and at the same time we have thousands of military personnel from all over Europe and also North America coming for the exercise to build peaceful future.
Okay, well, Heikki Otto, Chairman of the Grand Committee here at the Parliament in Helsinki in Finland, thank you very much for joining us on the Europe Conversation, and happy Christmas to you.
Well, thank you, and happy Christmas to everybody.